We are really privileged to have Sally Donnelly join us today. And this is a little personal for me because I've known Sally. She's pretty popular. A lot of people say that, but I actually did get to know her. But Sally's got a pretty interesting, diverse background. Met some big disappointment as a young woman. She wanted to be a jockey and ride horses. And almost got there, and there's plenty of time left for that, Sally. So hold that thought. For those of us who remember a great magazine called Time Magazine when it was in print, she worked for a bit of time there. And
still around or not?
Still around, I guess okay. I just look at me like, did this ever really happen? It was like printed on paper and you turn pages and it was pretty cool.
This thing that used to be called paper.
Yeah, my gosh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't understand. When were you born? I don't think you may have see that either. But worked for our chairman, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chairman Mullen, I think it was, who they're all good. He was especially good. I served for quite a long time with great distinction, and must have been a real privilege to serve with him. And then then you went back to CENTCOM with Jim Mattis?
Yeah, I went to work
then to
for General
CENTCOM to General Jim Mattis, our former Secretary of Defense, great American, who's in my TIGPC class, a couple people last week. What was your opinion? Okay, well, we're going to hit on that some more because Sally had a lot of experience with him. Then we went off and started a company, did well, amazing things. No good deed goes unpunished, as they say. If you've heard General Mattis, former Secretary Mattis speak, he was very surprised to get picked by former President Trump to be the nominee for the Defense Secretary. Probably just minutes after he was nominated, he probably called you, or I bet you he texted you within minutes, I can imagine that. But Sally was literally the architect of the Mattis Pentagon. All the senior appointees, she was behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, really putting together the team that worked with then Secretary Mattis. And I'm a little biased because I was on that team, but I thought it was an extraordinary team you put together. I remember walking in, and this isn't about me, but we have a little bit of time. I got an email from Jim Mattis, as he's like to be called, said, "Hey, Joe, I want to come see me. I want to talk to you." It was 6 a.m, so I'm thinking he's in D.C. No, he's in his office at Stanford. So I go in to see him, and he says, Joe, I want you on my team, talk to Sally Donnelly. Like everyone, if you want to be on the Mattis team, she's the gatekeeper. And then I'm going to brag about it a little bit here, Sally. So Pentagon, huge bureaucracy, multiple layers, look at a line, organizational chart. To actually talk to the Secretary of Defense, it's pretty daunting. I mean, there are so many layers of bureaucracy and pit bulls, and there's some personalities, Sally knows all too well. But I think, and this, Sally, I think a lot of people would agree with me when I say this. Sally was like the unofficial track. If you had a good idea or something urgent that no kidding needed to get in front of the Secretary of Defense, and you can't do this all the time, crying wolf, but she would answer your call and she would make a decision whether it's time to jump all those layers and all the pit bulls and all the protections and make sure that that the Secretary of Defense of the United States, I would say still the sole superpower in the world, it had made it to him. And I had some personal experience with that, as did thousands of others. But Sal, you did amazing work for our country, for this country, and it's great to see you now at Palace. I forgot how former Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer, just repeat to me, how do you describe Palace?
The mission of the company, one, is positive impact in national security, but what he says we do is spend our days smuggling emerging technology into the Pentagon.
I was going to say that. Okay. But it's an amazing company. It's growing. It's got some great people. I know them all, super high quality. Maybe they're hiring. Get in touch with Sally if they are. But she's just an amazing person all around, and we're really fortunate to have her hopefully inspire you to do great things like she's been doing and is continuing to do. So over to you, Sally.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Sally, thank you so much for joining us here today. As you know, the title of this speaker series is Silicon Valley and the U.S. government, and throughout your time in the national security ecosystem, you've really been focused on bringing the best technology to warfighters as fast as possible, kind of breaking the system, smuggling, so really excited to dive more into that. So maybe we could start a little bit more in terms of your background. You've been a senior national security official in multiple presidential administrations, but prior to that, as Joe alluded, you were a reporter at Time Magazine for 2 decades. What was your entry point into national security? Was it intentional, unintentional? Maybe share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so first, thanks for having me, and thanks to Steve and the rest of the team, and really appreciate it, and for everybody coming. I want to make this interactive. I don't like speeches, so also I'm a former journalist. If you don't ask me questions, I will ask you questions. So let's have a good time. So I was at Time for 21 years. I had always wanted to cover the Pentagon because of the size of it, the scale, the societal difference. As you know, about 1% of the US population actually serves. Like, who are those people, right? And why do they do it? And then a bit about defense policy and why do we make the decisions we make. So I finally got that opportunity after a long time at Time. There was actually a guy above me who had won the Pulitzer Prize, so it was hard to kick him off the stand. But eventually in 2005, I went to cover the Pentagon. And then when I left Time in 2007, I had the opportunity to work for Admiral Mullen, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he was appointed at that job and confirmed by the Senate, but appointed after Secretary Bob Gates had basically fired the guy before him. So that's actually an opportunity if you're going to come in after someone who's been fired. What are you going to do? What are you going to do differently? And then the last thing I'll say is Admiral Mullen was the son of Hollywood press agents. Kind of a weird background for a naval officer, but he understood the impact of strategic communication, communicating in a way that Americans could understand, no acronyms, right? And so he really wanted somebody to help him get up and out, which is what I tried to do.
Mm-hmm. So I found some photos to make this session a bit more entertaining. So maybe we'll start with this one right here. So you're in a helicopter, 2017, I believe, heading to Afghanistan with SecDef Mattis, as Joe mentioned, someone you worked very closely with. What's happening here? Tell us the secrets here. And also, I think SecDef Mattis is very well known for being a great leader. Like, I think just like from a leadership perspective, that's what a lot of individuals talk about. What were maybe some leadership qualities you learned from him that for the founders in the room we could take away from as individuals are building their companies?
Yeah, so we're just going into Afghanistan, and that little card he has, he boiled down his talking points to a card. And mostly he would go into an engagement, particularly with an international leader. And whereas the US government and the ambassador had said, here are 6 complaints, this is what you must tell them to do, and you can poke them in the chest if you want. Secretary Mattis would go in, and there he'd have a clean sheet of paper and say, what can I do for you? What's on your mind? So completely flip the script. And you could tell some senior international leaders I didn't expect that. I expected the US government and the Department of Defense to come here and tell me what to do, given the size and scale of what we did. But there, I think, we're kind of just joking, it looks like, because part of it is in such a pressurized role, you try to keep them light a little bit, right? But what Secretary Mattis was particularly good at, I think, is building and shaping small, effective teams, right? He would make everybody feel part of it, and he would move at speed. I remember one of the first times I left Chairman Admiral Mullen and went to work for General Mattis, who I had known as a reporter. I'd gotten to know General Mattis. And the XO, the executive officer, who's his kind of chief of staff, Secretary Mattis had said, hey, I need that as soon as you can, or when you can. And so I went to the XO and I said, what does that mean? Like, I don't know, next week or something? He said, Sally, that means 24 hours or less, right? You know, we've got things to do and you have to get on board. So speed mattered to him. And I think that's actually interesting from a business perspective, because we in the department move on 60% information, maybe 80%. Joe probably had 90. But you got to move with what you want, take informed risk, and solve the problem, accomplish the mission. So that's what we tried to do there.
Speed, that's a good lesson for founders. So you also alluded to working with Admiral Mike Mullen. So of course we have a photo of him as well. This was when he was also, so you worked with Admiral Mike Mullen when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and this was obviously also during a different presidential administration. How did your role and priorities differ when you were working with Mattis versus Mullen?
So he's the senior uniform member of the military services. And I used to tell him, you're just a 4-star, which in that system is kind of a joke because 4 stars are at the top. But above him was the Secretary of Defense, was the National Security Council, was the President. So he was an executor of policy, not a maker of policy. That's actually a picture from just last year, I believe. When Admiral Mullen came in, as I said, he was replacing somebody who had been fired. We were thinking about how to position him to have a credible voice. And you think, well, he's a 4-star admiral, doesn't he naturally have a credible voice? Yes and no, right? Particularly if you just fired the previous guy, are they going to fire Mullen? And part of that is presenting him in a way that's bipartisan, because the U.S. military actually has to say nonpartisan, but in order to make sure that he could reach across the aisle. So for his first speech in Washington, well, the first thing we did was take him into the Pentagon press room by himself. The previous chairman had only gone alongside the Secretary of Defense, which sent a signal, particularly to a aggressive and disappointed press corps, that he would not say anything that the SecDef didn't want him to, the previous General Pace, right? So we took Mullen in there by himself to show, hey, I'm the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I'll tell you what I think. In fact, I swear to Congress to give my best military advice and personal opinion. So kind of set the stage. But the other thing we did, his first formal speech was at a new think tank in Washington called the Center for American Security, the Center for New American Security, and it was one of the first that really tried to be aggressively bipartisan. So when we were talking to General Brown, that's the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs currently right now, and I tried to put myself in his shoes. How do I get out there? And he's a quieter senior officer than many, and certainly quieter than his predecessor, General Milley. So I said, hey, General Brown, if you would come, give a few remarks, and then I'd love for the former chairman to do a fireside chat with you, because it sets him on a certain stage. Admiral Mullen continues to have a role in the public debate, whether it's on Iran, whether it's political, activity in the military, whether it's geopolitical issues. So General Brown felt very comfortable because it was somebody like Mullen.
So maybe you could touch on, do you have a most memorable moment as a senior national security officer? Some
aren't so pleasant. One is working for Admiral Mullen, and there was an incident at Fort Hood, which is a U.S. Army base in Texas. And a relatively young officer, a major, had taken his weapon and killed, I think it was 13 of his colleagues, 13 service men and women on base at Fort Hood. And it's just such a wrenching thing to be killed by one of your own, right? And I just remember going in there and watching Admiral Mullen, and he had, on his screen, he had the TV divided into 4. It was Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, and I think like CNBC or something, because there you can divide it. But that's how he saw the world. He wanted different information. But it was just so wrenching for him, for a chairman who cared so much about the troops and servicemen and women and giving them a good opportunity. So that was particularly difficult. The other difficult one was, this is probably too old for this group, but General McChrystal, Stan McChrystal, was the commander in Afghanistan. And he was sort of talking very publicly, meeting with a lot of journalists to explain what the mission was in Afghanistan, how we were working with the Afghan government, et cetera. But he did an interview with a reporter from Rolling Stone and spent a lot of time with the Rolling Stone reporter, who wasn't a usual Pentagon reporter, embedded and spend a lot of time with him. And the story came out, and it was very critical of General McChrystal, his kind of negative, condescending attitude towards the senior political leadership, including the Vice President, Joe Biden. So I got an early copy because I had good friends in the press corps. And I remember handing it to Mullen, and he looked at me and he said, "How bad is it?" And I said, it's not very good. And he read it, and it ended up, even though he and Secretary Gates advocated for General McChrystal to stay in his position, President Obama ended up firing him and replacing him with General Petraeus, which moved. But it's just, when you're in leadership, those moments where you either from your senior people, your 4-stars, down to your troops, you just feel, for him, I could tell, such a personal amount of leadership and, frankly, disappointment in some of that.
So maybe we can transition to nowadays. You've been working with the private sector, supporting companies looking to break into government. Maybe we can just break down the different phases of how you should navigate government from a startup lifecycle perspective. So say, for instance, we have a lot of Stanford folks in the room here today. You're a really smart Stanford PhD. You, Sally, get the pleasure of starting a company with this super smart Stanford PhD. And how should a technical founder with no experience working with government even just think about the basic compliance requirements of FedRAMP, ITAR, even just getting a security clearance? Like, how would you kind of advise going about that to start?
Well, bring your patience, work out or transcendental meditate or something, because it's a long, long process for the most part, right? So bring that and understand it's not clear cut. Startup guys would always say, who's the one person I call at the Department of Defense? Well, you guys know, if you've studied Department of Defense acquisition for even 1 minute, there is no real one person, right? I think the entire department can say no, but no one says yes. And that's a bit apocryphal, obviously, but so one, I assume you have a product, right, that works. You have a capability that the department needs, right? So when I say patience, and they're not, it's not a hostile environment, but it is a very cumbersome, highly regulated, highly politicized environment that is in many ways dominated by, I'd say, the top 10 defense primes, who are sort of burnt in the system and take a lot to displace. That said, it's possible, right? So have a capability, have some patience, but understand all of the different pressures that come with buying something in the Department of Defense. And you will find it frustrating because it's murky, right? That said, if it's a hell of a capability, and you bring it and explain to the right people at the right time using simple words, right? They will get there. And particularly if you focus on operational need, right? And that can be anything from back office things for the defense travel system, which is a nightmare that we all want to avoid, right? To weapons downrange, to sensors, to counter UAS. There's a whole range of operational needs, but you have to be able to prove it quick, make it work tonight, and then understand who's who in the zoo of who will actually buy it. And I was just talking to Joe beforehand. The other thing that you really need to look for in the department, as I think in many big institutions, I'm not calling out the department in a negative term, but there are people who are risk takers and have the courage and the top cover, and they want to move fast. That's one, Jim Mattis, and actually Admiral Mullen in a different way. But they want to move fast. They're going to take some risk. That's risk to them professionally, probably. It's risk to mission, right? You hope it's not risk to force. But finding those people and encouraging success, right? And part of the problem right now is the department doesn't really talk out loud, right? They'll come and sell you Replicator, if you know what that is. It's a new $500 million program. Or they'll discuss small efforts. But there is not engaged, sustained participation and conversation. It feels like to me, you guys can tell me I'm wrong, between the senior levels of the Department of Defense and guys like you in this community. So I think that's another thing that they could do. But for founders and funders, patience, capability, operational need, and then just continued pressure to make the case.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Maybe we could just break down the procurement process a little bit more. So SBIRs, STTRs, a few months ago, you hosted a great event for PEOs and CEOs. Like, what's the importance of PEOs, and should young startup founders, young startups think about becoming a sub to a larger prime, or how should we think about procurement as a startup just getting off the ground?
Yeah, first you're going to test my level of understanding of the FAR and acquisition processes, so bear with me. Two, I think it's always worth meeting people, right? I probably overweight on human intelligence, human connectivity. So she just said a bunch of acronyms. I think I know what they mean, but...
You definitely know what they mean, but okay.
No, but the level of specific detail on SBIRs and STTRs, like, you have to understand the superstructure, but to me, you also have to understand the atmospherics and how that's going to get done. And we were talking before, if there is an issue of particular, I would think, resonance, particularly in Washington. So, for example, the barracks for troops have been plagued by problems. Mold has been, found in many barracks. And there's a sense that many barracks are not healthy, right? And that has risen to the U.S. Congress. So there are people, members of Congress, who are making this a hobby horse, right? So do you have a capability that could help fix that problem, address that problem? Then you can use the political interest to drive change, right? And you can drive, you're not going to make a PEO, which is Program Executive Officer, for those of you that don't know that. You're not going to drive him or her to write a contract for that, but you're going to raise the attention of it, right? And raise it as a concern. And as long as you continue to educate people in the department about what the capability is that exists, I actually think one of the problems is people in the department don't actually know what exists on the outside, right? They're so used to living in the world that they do with primes and systems that are antiquated sometimes, that they actually don't know what you guys in this room are working on. So how do we break that down and speed that, I think, engagement process? And that's what we try to do almost every day.
Yeah. Any tips and secrets for how to educate government decision makers on the benefits of your technology, especially if they don't have technical backgrounds?
Yes.
Or do they just hire you?
Most of them don't have technical background that I've run across, the people in key decision-making roles. So keep it simple, stupid. It used to be a political slogan in the Clinton campaign 100 years ago. Keep it simple, stupid. But explain it to your grandmother, right? You think I'm kidding, but for guys, men and women at the operational level, they don't have the technical background. I do think we're having a generational shift that increasingly, and Joe maybe and Steve and Ernestine, you may disagree, but the younger ones who are coming up, 2, 3 stars, actually have technical comfort, if not deep knowledge. So they understand what they need, they've seen it out there, and they want to bring it in, right? And they have to force the acquisition system in some ways to get there. But I think part of it is just to be in the club, meaning go to events, be around. You have to come to Washington. I'm sorry, that's where the government is. But come and participate in the clubhouse activities of the Department of Defense. Some of the conferences, maybe a trade association, certainly events that we have. But I did that PEO CEO event, Program Executive Officer, the guys who actually buy stuff, and CEOs, people who have founded it, because one level down there is a skepticism, is a gentle way to put it, and a wariness inside the government by PEOs. Many of them had never been to an event like that. And we brought them, we gave them iced tea and a hot dog and a roll, and
Makes a huge difference.
and just introduced them to a network. It just broadened, and it was the 6 degrees of separation, the Kevin Bacon thing. Like, that PEO knew that person who kind of knew that CEO, and it just kind of broke it down. In fact, the people who helped put that on with me, said, see you next year. And I said, too long, because these PEOs will just go back in their bunkers. And too long, let's have a holiday party. So I think we're trying to plan with us.
Awesome.
You can come. Anyone's invited.
Yes, yes. So as a startup grows and scales, I think building those relationships is even more important. Maybe you could share a little bit more on any secrets you might have for that, or also perhaps share, don't have to name the company, but maybe describe it from a capability standpoint, companies that you have supported as they've grown and scaled and worked to build those government relations.
Yeah, and I should say I have one of my directors who actually does all the hard work. I just sort of float above it. But part of it is trying to understand what the capability is. And if you can't explain it to me, I can't explain it to anybody, right? So if you come in with a 50-page slide deck and a deep technical, I'm going to walk away because I need to be able to translate it. And I don't have time, nor do the guys who are trying to get interested have the time. What's the problem it solves, right? And how can I get it in my unit's equipment box tonight, right? So speed and capability are really important. And part of that you do by, one, having a great product, but listening, right? Being in positions, like I said, these events or trade shows. The Association of the United States Army, often called Boys and Toys, is happening in 2 weeks. They take over the entire convention center in Washington, lots of static displays. But I'd say on a good day, 6,000 Army people walking around, right? They all have their name on their shirt and their rank, so you can say, hey, what do you do, right? Part of it is to build a human connection. I don't want to overweight on that, but I think it's really important to building trust where people will tell you what the problem is. So we have an advisory arm, which is kind of the engine. We also have a venture arm, which is dual use. It's a special purpose vehicle. It's not a fund. So it's kind of friends and family. But we try to collect interesting companies and match them with LPs who are very interested. So one of those is Hermeus. I think I might use that as an example. I was telling Ernestine earlier, I remember exactly where I was the moment the CEO called me, because it was a referral from a different company. So he called me and said, we might need help in Washington. I'm kind of a gearhead for airplanes. So when he said he was building a hypersonic airplane to connect the world, I kind of fell in love over the phone. And I said, absolutely want to work with you, and I want to ride on the first plane. That was an emotional reaction. What we really needed is a structural and not scientific, but a really process-driven campaign plan. Who does he need to see? What's his timeline? You know, in our company, these campaign plans are ends, ways, and means, right? What are your lines of effort? How do you continue to iterate, get new information, course adjust, right? It feels military in some ways, but we don't militarize it, right? We just talk to the C-suite about where they're going, what the resources they have to spend on going to a marketing show or working on new tech or doing an agreement with a wind tunnel, right? So it's all those aspects. And part of it, I'll be honest, I frustrate some of our leadership teams because I can't get them a contract overnight. I never promise a contract overnight. But the one thing they know, I will never leave them. I am going to partner with them until we fly, in Hermes' case, or build the best secure AI system, or a supply chain. Whatever their mission is, I'm a partner. Not for life, but particularly if their capability starts to fall, or their C-suite increasingly doesn't listen, or they do things that I think are just incredibly mistaken, say on the Hill or something. We just have a very honest conversations. So I think a C-suite that listens is just crucial, and then bringing us in. We have had clients who don't feel yet that consultant in Washington is really there to help, right? And the business development guys also sometimes are threatened, or we haven't built trust with them from the beginning. So we spend a lot of time doing, we're here for you, we're here if you succeed, what's interesting is we work on retainers, not success fees. So I actually financially, it doesn't matter to me, but our mission is to improve the national security of the United States every day. And we do that by providing those people inside with awareness and the reach to get the best in the world, which is what you guys make.
So we spent a lot of time talking about how startups can break into government. Maybe we can spend some time talking about what DoD needs to do to change to allow startups to. I see that grimace. You're like, yes, a lot needs to change. But maybe you could talk a little bit about what does government need to do, maybe from a investment, cultural, kind of policy standpoint, in order to have true asymmetric advantage over adversaries?
Yeah, so I think we have to understand the moment we're in, first of all. I went back and read a speech that was given on September 10th, 2001, right? September 10th, 2001. And it was by Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, who had some challenges in a lot of ways, but he was a business person. He was a politician, but he was also a business person. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he helped create Splenda, if you guys know what Splenda is. So you should thank him for that. But he had worked at Searle, he had worked at a technology company. He was a business process person. And in September 10th, he gave a speech about radically restructuring the acquisition system at the Department of Defense. He basically started it with, I see the enemy. It is complex, it is big, it is very effective, et cetera. And the enemy is not the Soviet Union or any other outside actor. The enemy is the Pentagon bureaucracy. I just recommend you all read the speech because it will inspire you to continue to do what you're doing and fight to get inside the system. But I think there is not a recognition in the department and also in the board of directors, what they call Congress, to understand I think the sensitive, crucial moment where we are, right? And I think so. I think if you guys followed the services at all, 3 or 4 years ago, General Berger, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps, revolutionized the Marine Corps. And he shifted from all places to everywhere, to a Pacific-focused force, and he disbanded his tank force, right? For a U.S. military person to ever give up a tank is a radical act. And he got incredibly criticized by former senior Marine Corps generals. But what he was doing was moving towards a faster, more agile, more attritable, more autonomous Marine Corps. And that's where they're building to now. So I think we need many more Dave Bergers, including in policy shops, than perhaps what we have now.
So maybe a fun question. If you were Secretary of Defense today, sorry, SecDef Austin, what would your top 3 priorities be?
No one's ever asked me that. I did ask Stan McChrystal when I said, Stan, when they name you as the head of the U.S. Army, what are you going to do? He said, Sally, 2 things. Disband the band and disband the Golden Knights, who are the fun parachute team. Stan has no sense of humor. But he also thinks those are extraneous, extracurricular things that armies don't actually need. So I think part of it would be to look at the extraneous. 2, back to Rumsfeld. He's not a hero, but on the process and bureaucracy, he was very good. The most radical thing he tried to do was to consolidate the 3 different executive dining rooms in every service. The Army has one, the Air Force has one, the Navy. Such a simple thing, and the system crushed him for that. They fought back, right? And so part of it is to try to build a team that understands, 1, the moment we're in, and 2, that the money is U.S. taxpayer money, right? And this is about protecting and enabling service members to be the best fighting force they can. And everything outside of that is a waste of money. So I think doing that early on, one example from our current leader I think is worthwhile. Deputy Secretary of Defense Kath Hicks, when she first came in, she used to put a deadline on every memo she wrote. And the memos were very short, that's another thing. But have a deadline, you report back to me in 30 days. 30 days after that, we'll make a decision, to instill a sense of urgency to a system that they have it in the field. I'll tell you, General Kurilla in U.S. Central Command in the Middle East feels that right now. But the guys in the Pentagon don't absorb it often. And so I try to build a sense of urgency and speed that I didn't see much when I was there.
Final question for me before we turn it over to Q&A. Any kind of final words of advice you have for the founders, patriots in the room here?
Yeah, just understand it's a different world is cliche, but it is it can be complex, confusing, politicized, regulated environment, but it can be fought through. Right? You can have successes. There are examples of success. We have had it with some of our companies. Hermes is one, got a $30 million matching fund from the Air Force. So there are ways to go about it. So please, one, thank you for doing what you do. Two, the country kind of needs you. Uncle Sam needs you. But it's your energy and your brains that the government continues to need. And I think the last 25 years, we've lost a lot of connectivity and respect. And I think the government needs to respect you all more, and they are looking for help. So we will find ways for you to help them. But just thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Sally. Questions for Sally?
Sally, I think something that's really interesting about your experience is that you start at the highest levels of.
Oh, and I was asked to repeat the question for the video crew, but just kind of highest levels of tension between civilian and military.
Yeah,
communities.
And when it works well, it's a thing of beauty. Right? So when Admiral Mullen and Bob Gates were in office, they basically didn't listen to staff, right? They would have their twice-a-day meeting, staff things would bubble up, they'd either ignore them or decide them. So in that department, which is a very hierarchical institution, leadership matters, right? And so if you get two who are aligned, it can work like clockwork. I think Ash Carter, was the Secretary of Defense 2015, 2016, who I had the pleasure of working with in the private sector and then helped him some in the department, he too he wasn't waiting, but he brought the best of the operators in to get their perspective before he set up things like the Defense Innovation Unit, like the Strategic Capabilities Office. He just empowered them, understanding that the men and women downrange were the customers, right? So that, when you have operational need, that can drive, and when the civilians get that, it's a thing of beauty, right? Sometimes the civilian political leadership can be distracted, which I think, frankly, at the beginning of President Trump's first term, they were, and it caused an imbalance. So I think having political leaderships, campaigns, understand that they're going to take power, right? And both of them should be planning that right now, right? What are the 3 or 4 things you need to do, and move at speed to do that? The one thing that I think stands out in my mind in all the people I've met, Admiral Mullen was the Chief of Naval Operations before he became the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And in the Pentagon, firing a senior official is still a cause for churn and disruption and upset, because they think these guys work so hard, men and women, to be 3 and 4 stars. You can't just fire them. Well, the first thing Admiral Mullen did when he was Chief of Naval Operations, they say before he sat down the first day, I don't know if that's true, but he fired a 3-star admiral, because that admiral was reported to be, and Admiral Mullen knew, a toxic leader. And he sent a signal by removing that person from the system on the very first day. You know what? Everybody understood that you couldn't lead like that under Admiral Mullen. So he sent a signal. So I think part of that, and I think he did that by himself. He might have told the Secretary of the Navy, but sometimes you just have to move out and wait for a politician or the political leadership to catch up.
So the question is, any cultural shocks or almost like even regrets going from journalism to government?
Yeah, probably 4 million. I'll only hit a couple. Also, I didn't really have a choice because I was laid off from time. So I could have gone to get another job maybe, but I had a great time, and Admiral Mullen was looking for help, allegedly. Look, part of it was just the dramatically male environment you walk into. Two, I was dismissed from the very beginning. One, because I was a reporter. When I left journalism, went to work for Mullen. One, I was a reporter, so I probably lied, cheat, or steal, many people think, right, just to begin with. Two, I had never served, so that was a diminishment. And then I was a female. So it was a triple whammy of beautiful things. But you get over that by, as Condi Rice says, know your throw weights, right? Like know your, excuse me, shouldn't scourge. Know what you're talking about and have enough base knowledge to get farther down the road, right? And any military officer you can, or enlisted, you can start with where are you from and what do you do, right? And that just starts a conversation that makes you learn more. So it was, look, there have been some uncomfortable moments, but working for Admiral Mullen, so that's a kind of problem in the bureaucratic terms, because I had the toppest of top cover, you know, like he was the chairman. And so that was both a power, but also a responsibility. I would never try to say what Admiral Mullen thought, or Admiral Mullen wants this done. I would just try to conduct myself with some level of professionalism, knowing that he would back me up, I hope, eventually. The same with Secretary Mattis. So it's just respect where you are, but also try to carry out what they call in the military commander's intent, right? And then the last thing is, I love the United States Press Corps, and the Pentagon Press Corps is one of the most mature in the system. They want to be there. And most of them, if they're like me, have been accused by their editors of being too pro-military. So it's an odd place to be, right? But I respect what they do, and I try to encourage the people who work in the department to see them as a partner in supporting the Constitution of the United States, right? Sometimes people get frustrated, but if you keep your balance across and have built trust, it can work. I think. I hope.
Great. Thanks again. Steve, do you want to come up and wrap us up here?
How many of you have seen an org chart of the Department of Defense? Anybody? You should all go look it up, right? And you see generals, and you see, you know, the Office of Secretary of Defense, and you see the services, and it's a matrix organization, because then you see the combatant commands and whatever. But Sally, what was your title? What was your title?
Well, for Mullen, they called me Spec Ass.
Yeah.
So I was special assistant to the chairman, and for Mattis, I was senior advisor.
Great. So you're looking at this big org chart, and if you're like right out of Stanford or have a startup, you're looking for the biggest names you could call on or get to know and whatever. And for any of you who ever want to sell to commercial companies, that's the same kind of model. You'll look at the org chart and say, who's the CIO or who's the VP of engineering or whatever. But what you're missing, and it took me about 15 years in my career to realize on top of the org chart, there's an influence map. And the influence map are people like Sally, where, yeah, you could try to call on X or Y, but the first person they're going to talk to, even if you could get them on the phone or get their admin on the phone, the first person they're going to turn to is their senior advisor and go, what the heck is this, and why should I be talking to them? Correct?
In many cases.
Right. Big idea. Never confuse the title with the influence for the rest of your career, whether it's in government or whether it's in commercial stuff. Yeah, the org chart is great to have, and it's a wonderful starting place. But you really need to know who's whispering in whose ear and what's the relationship between each one of them. So don't pass up, gee, it's just a senior advisor. Okay? Let's roll up one for the class. The second is your current firm. Does it do sales? Is it a rainmaker? Is it a door opener? You take a retainer to do what for the class?
From the IRS?
No, for the class.
Yeah.
Why don't I have a VP of sales, I'm a
Yeah.
startup and whatever.
Yeah.
What is it that they should know that not just your firm, but there are lots of firms like you in Washington,
Yeah.
do something your startup VP of sales can't do? What is it?
I think we can accelerate and elevate, meaning.
You know where the bodies are buried.
And I know the risk takers, right? And I know people who will say no and how you get around them.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if you're doing a startup, you could either try to reinvent that knowledge yourself or hire a firm with people who actually will shortcut maybe a year or two of learning. And so when their retainer seems absurdly high because you only raised X, then this is kind of a return on investment conversation. Do they know anything you don't? And in fact, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, but the minute you know what you don't know, you'll be hiring somebody like, and this is not a pitch for Sally, it's trying to interpret what is it these firms do that,
Yeah.
gee, I have a sales organization. I even got smart enough to say, hey, if I'm selling to the DoD, maybe my sales office shouldn't be in Mountain View. Right? No, seriously. So it takes startups sometimes 6 months to figure that one out. So those are the two summaries for me is, gee, don't confuse the org chart with the influence map, and you really need to understand who are the influencers in whatever large organization you're going into. And two is when you see these, quote, advisory firms in Washington, understand that they are a shortcut for your sales organization's go-to-market strategy to kind of figure out, oh, I could probably learn this myself, but I might be burning a ton of cash when I'm doing that. Sally, is that a fair
That's
summary?
very good.
Right.
See why you're a professor.
It's because I can't do anything else anymore I teach. So thank you, guys.